Well, it is the video everybody's been waiting for. This is my full 2024 March Madness official bracket prediction. We just got the bracket released, fresh off the presses, with nothing filled in. Here we go. Let's do it. Beginning with the East region. It is the number one overall seed, UConn, taking on Stenson. Congratulations to Stenson for making the tournament, but certainly the defending national champions will win that game. Next, you do have FAU. Last year made the Final Four, taking on Northwestern. I actually like Northwestern, the 9 seed from the Big Ten, to advance to the second round to take on UConn. The 5v12 matchup, it is San Diego State taking on the upstart UAB Blazers. Give me San Diego State. We know there's going to be some 12/5 upsets. That's coming, don't worry. But give me San Diego State to hold serve. They made the national title last year. 4v13 game, it is Auburn. Now, Auburn analytically is the best team, or is, the best 4 seed in college basketball. I think they beat Yale relatively easily. Yale almost lost to Brown, who was 13-17, so I'm not high on Yale. I think Auburn advances there. Next, you do have 6v11 game. It is BYU taking on Duquesne. This is another team, just like UAB. Duquesne, nobody thought would be here. Give me BYU, who I thought would have been a very solid 5 seed. They get knocked down to the 6 line. I think they advance to the second round. Illinois taking on Morehead State in a 3v14 matchup. I like the Illini. They just won the Big Ten tournament. The 3 seed advances there. 7v10 game, it is Washington State taking on Drake. I will take Washington State, the 7 seed, to advance, beating Drake. I was considering having Drake go on a run. It's not going to happen this year, maybe next year for the Bulldogs. And then you do have Iowa State taking on South Dakota State, 2v15 game. I have to go Iowa State. The defensive-minded team gets the job done, and they get the win there. Moving on to the West region, I'm going to go down both regions. That's how I'm going to do it. It is North Carolina taking on either Howard or Wagner. I do think that Wagner will defeat Howard, but North Carolina, certainly you would expect a 1 to beat a 16. It would be very shocking. Even though it happened last year, it happened a few years ago, I'm not going to be picking a 16 over a 1 in this tournament. Next, you do have Mississippi State taking on Michigan State. So Michigan State not in the first 4. They've got great upside. I have to pick Tom Izzo and Michigan State to beat Mississippi State. I was not high on Mississippi State. I know they had a good showing in the SEC conference tournament. I'm still taking Michigan State. They are very unpredictable. They did not have a great record, but I think we get a classic matchup in the second round before the Sweet 16, North Carolina taking on Michigan State. Next, it is St. Mary's and Grand Canyon. Believe it or not, I will be picking St. Mary's, the defensive-minded West Coast school, to defeat Grand Canyon, who comes into this game. What are they, 30-4? A lot of people are going to be picking them. That's a typical 12v5 upset. Guys, don't fall for it. St. Mary's wins that game. Alabama taking on Charleston. Bama, the offensive firepower is unbelievable. I think they do enough to beat Charleston in a higher scoring game. Bama's offense is just too much to handle for Charleston, even though they do have terrible defense. Next, you do have Clemson versus New Mexico. Give me New Mexico, who's riding high off a very nice performance in the Mountain West Conference tournament. The Mountain West is a very tough conference to predict. I do think there's going to be one Mountain West team that possibly goes on a run to the Elite Eight. A lot of the other teams are going to lose early. I think New Mexico beats Clemson, who towards the end of the season did not play well. They looked bad in the ACC tournament. I think they're a weak 6 seed, and New Mexico wins that game. Next, it is Baylor taking on Colgate. Now, Colgate has made the NCAA tournament, I think, like 4 straight years. Analytically, this is their worst team. So give me Baylor, the 3 seed, very solid. I view Baylor as a high floor team, low ceiling. So I don't think they're going to go very deep, but certainly I think they're going to beat a team like Colgate in the first round. Dayton taking on Nevada. Give me Nevada, another Mountain West team playing well. Dayton has been playing terrible towards the end of the season. There is no way I'm picking them right now. If they win, more power to them, but there's no way I'm going to pick Dayton as a 7 seed. A lot of people think they were overseeded going into this tournament. Arizona taking on Long Beach State. Here's a nice little tropical matchup. You know, coming into today, it kind of felt like Long Beach State had the same vibe as Florida Gulf Coast. So am I going to be picking Long Beach State to upset Arizona, just like, you know, last year we had Arizona losing to a 15 seed. I don't think it happens again. I think Arizona advances the 2 seed in that region. Moving on, I got to make sure I move this up high enough so my face isn't covering it, or my screen recording thing, face cam isn't recovering it. It is Houston taking on Longwood. Certainly, we're going to be going with Houston. A lot of people overreacting. They did have a very bad loss to Iowa State. I actually think that's a good thing for Houston. They're going to galvanize. They didn't peak too early. They're ready to go. They've got an amazing defense. They've got a good enough offense. Trust me, Houston got a god draw. Guys, they will advance and beat Longwood. Next, you do have Nebraska taking on Texas A&M. I like Nebraska. They're normally not in the tournament. They make it. Texas A&M was kind of on the bubble too. They had a nice run in the SEC tournament, but give me Nebraska, who played well against Illinois, lost that game late. I think they do enough on offense to advance and face the 1 seed Houston in a fun second round matchup. Next, you do have Wisconsin taking on James Madison. James Madison early in the season, really good, kind of left for dead. Now they're 31-3. They win their conference, even not even being the favorites, and they get in with the auto bid as a 12 seed. Wisconsin, they were playing terrible. They had a nice run, maybe a little bit of a rebirthing in the Big Ten tournament, but give me a 12 over a 5. Give me James Madison to beat Wisconsin as a 12 over 5. I have not been sold on Wisconsin, even when Wisconsin earlier in the season was projected as a 2 seed. I did not like them. Next, it is Duke versus Vermont. Duke, very inconsistent, but this is not your typical Duke team. They've got some upperclassmen, they've got some veteran presences, and I think they win this game over Vermont. Even though Vermont does have the upside analytically to beat a 4 seed like Duke, I think Duke gets the job done. They advance there. Texas Tech taking on NC State. NC State, nobody thought they would be here. They steal a bid, winning the ACC tournament. But give me Texas Tech, one of the deepest teams in college basketball, a 6 seed that's kind of forgotten about. They're going to win this game. They're going to advance to the second round. Kentucky taking on Oakland in a 3v14 matchup. Kentucky, very similar to Alabama. High-octane offense, virtually no defense, but I will take Kentucky to beat Oakland. Congratulations to Oakland, by the way. Very competitive Horizon League this year, but Kentucky gets that win. The 3 seed advances. You've got the 7v10 game. The first 4 matchup is Boise State taking on Colorado. I think Colorado, because of their guard play, will beat Boise State. Analytically, Boise State against good teams has been horrible this year. Colorado beats Boise State, but then loses to the high-octane, guard-heavy Florida Gators. Florida will be advancing to the second round. Marquette and Western Kentucky. I am going to be predicting a pretty crazy upset here with Western Kentucky defeating the 2 seed Marquette Golden Eagles. Marquette is out early. I predicted Marquette last year to the Final Four. It didn't work out for me. I'm not feeling it this year with Marquette at all. To me, they're a typical run-of-the-mill 2 seed that loses in round 1. Western Kentucky, nobody thought they would be here. They go on a run. They catch lightning in a bottle. And you've got your weird hybrid 7v15 matchup. I can see it playing out in my head, and that is the prediction when it comes to that. Moving on to the final Midwest region here in the first round, it is Purdue taking on Montana State or Grambling. Certainly we would expect Montana State to defeat Grambling, and then Purdue. No, I have to go Montana State. I'm kidding. Purdue is going to finally beat a 16 seed. They did only lose once, but still, Purdue, they should advance in that one. Next, you do have Utah State taking on TCU, probably the most even matchup of the first round. And it's not surprising it's an 8v9 game, but I don't know. You could flip a coin on this one. I will be taking Utah State, though, to advance. So I guess I do have a decent amount of Mountain West teams advancing. Utah State, the 8 seed, advancing there. I think they're slightly better than TCU. 5v12 game, it is Gonzaga taking on McNeese and Will Wade. I'm going to be picking another 12 over a 5. I like McNeese to beat Gonzaga. The analytics would say Gonzaga, well, not the analytics, but a lot of people would say Gonzaga is overseeded. We thought Gonzaga would probably be a 6 seed. They played well, but their conference is terrible. I don't think they have the firepower this year that they have in past years, and McNeese is a high-octane team. They're your prototypical team that profiles as a 12 over 5, so I will take them in terms of that one. Next, it is Kansas and Samford. So Kansas dealing with injuries, the lowest seed they've ever been. going into their conference tournament, the Big 12 tournament. They lose right away to Cincinnati, but I think they get some players back. They beat Sanford. Sanford also had some injuries towards the end of their year. Give me Kansas. It's not going to be an upset. I know there's going to be a narrative that both Kansas and Duke are susceptible, and maybe they are, but I think they both hold serve and they win in round one. Next, you do have South Carolina taking on Oregon. I think there's another team lightning in the bottle. Oregon, nobody thought they were going to be in this tournament. They were kind of on the way outside looking in going into the Pac-12 tournament. They basically needed to win it, and they won it. So I think they end up beating South Carolina, a team that I've thought was kind of a fraud from the beginning because analytically they profile horribly. Now, maybe South Carolina proves me wrong, but just my opinion, I think they lose. This is your typical 11-6 in the first round. Next, you do have Creighton taking on Akron. I am going to be going with Creighton. I think this is going to be a very, very, very close game. Creighton will win it at the end. They will escape. Very close game for a 3v14. I would take Akron against the spread, plus 10 or whatever they're going to be, but I do think Creighton, the 3 seed, hold on to win that game. Next, you do have a 7v10 game. So the first 4, it is Virginia. A lot of people surprised they made the tournament taking on Colorado State. I think, Colorado State's going to beat Virginia, but I do love this draw for Texas. So I think Texas very easily wins that game, whoever they face there. And then you do have Tennessee taking on St. Peter's. So St. Peter's, once again, they are a 15 seed, not a 16 seed. We remember them a few years ago against Kentucky in a 2v15 game, advancing and having a crazy Cinderella run. I think Tennessee and their offense, they win that game. Actually, they've got a better defense than offense, but they win that game as a 2 seed. They hold serve and they advance. Moving on to the second round. So these are for spots in the Sweet 16. It is UConn taking on Northwestern. It was a nice little run for Northwestern. It's not going to continue. UConn is an absolute juggernaut. They won the entire thing last year. They're like 6 deep. Analytically, they're amazing. Don't overthink it. UConn advances there. Next, you do have San Diego State taking on Auburn. I really don't like San Diego State. Like, I was considering having them losing to UAB, but I gave them the win there. Auburn against teams that are worse than them, they're unbelievable. The problem is teams that are better, and that's going to be an issue for Auburn when they face UConn. But I think Auburn, the draw that they got is very tough with UConn in the Sweet 16, but they should run through both Yale and either San Diego State or UAB. Next, you do have BYU taking on Illinois. Kind of a fun matchup. I will be taking Illinois here. So far going very chalky in this region because I think the East region is so good when it comes to the best 1 seed, the best 3 seed, the best 4 seed possibly in this region. And then the next game, it is Washington State taking on Iowa State. I will be having another upset here. Washington State beating Iowa State. I have not been high on Iowa State this year. I do not think they have the offense, if firepower, to go deep into this tournament. There could be a scenario where maybe Iowa State wins this game, but then I think they lose in the next round anyways. Moving on to the bottom quadrant, you do have North Carolina taking on Michigan State. I don't think we're going to see an upset there. That is the Tom Izzo special, isn't it? Michigan State is a 9 seed beating a 1 seed. North Carolina, they've got to be pretty pissed off about that draw. It is very annoying, but I think as a 1 seed, they hold serve and they move on. St. Mary's taking on Alabama. Polar opposites here. St. Mary's, defensive-minded team, Alabama, all offense. I think the defense wins this game. I just cannot trust Alabama. St. Mary's makes a Sweet 16 run. They defeat Bama. The 5 seed makes it there. Moving on to New Mexico taking on Baylor. And New Mexico has a little Cinderella run to the Sweet 16. Baylor, I think they have a very low ceiling. And I think New Mexico can beat them. That would be my one Mountain West team I would pick possibly to go far. Arizona and Nevada. Could we get a 10v11 Mountain West versus Mountain West? It's not going to happen. It will be Arizona rebounding after last year's performance and advancing into the Sweet 16 after losing in the first round. Moving on to the South region. It is Houston taking on Nebraska. Nice little season for Nebraska. They're not beating Houston. Houston will be advancing there. James Madison taking on Duke. I do think we see another Cinderella. I just don't trust Duke this year. It doesn't feel like it's their year. I will say Duke is a different team to where they're more, veteran. That may help them, and there's also not a lot of pressure on them. But I'm taking James Madison to beat Duke. They have only 3 losses on the season. I know their schedule's not good. James Madison, though, the name, it just rings like a Cinderella team. and they advance on to the Sweet 16. Next, you do have Texas Tech taking on Kentucky. I think Kentucky and their offense move on against Tech. That'll be a really fun matchup, 3v6. And then Florida and Western Kentucky. I do think Florida beats Western Kentucky and sets up an all-SEC Sweet 16 matchup. Look at that, 3v7 and 3v7 right there. They advance. They beat Western Kentucky. Moving on to the Midwest, it is Purdue taking on Utah State. Purdue, they also rebound just like Arizona, and they advance to the Sweet 16. They beat Utah State. I think they got a really good draw in the Midwest. McNeese and Kansas. I'm going to be having Kansas hold serve here and knock off McNeese to set up a 1v4 chalk matchup in the Sweet 16 of the Midwest. Next, you do have Oregon taking on Creighton, and Oregon, I think the Cinderella run continues for them. The 11 seed advances onto the Sweet 16. Creighton, I'm not high on them. I think they barely get by Akron and then lose to Oregon. Oregon is that one team that barely makes it in the tournament and then goes on a run. And then you do have Texas taking on Tennessee. Very tough matchup for Tennessee. I'm really considering picking Texas, but I just can't do it. I will have Tennessee advancing, so that's an 11v2 game right there. Now, moving on to my Sweet 16 games, it is UConn taking on Auburn. And guys, the problem when it comes to Auburn, they always beat teams that are worse than them. Analytically, they are really good, but in terms of facing teams that are ultra elite like a UConn, what we've seen this year, it's just not going to happen. So Auburn, I think by far is the best 4 seed in this tournament. Just based on what we've seen, it's not going to happen. If Auburn does beat UConn, whoever predicts that, they're going to win their bracket. I just cannot see that happening based on the level of play they've shown against ultra elite teams in, this year during the regular season. And then you do have Illinois taking on Washington State. I will have Illinois, the 3 seed, advancing on to the Elite Eight there. That's a 1v3 matchup in terms of that region. Next, you do have North Carolina taking on St. Mary's. I'm going to have St. Mary's beat North Carolina. I just haven't been a big fan of North Carolina as a 1 seed throughout this entire year. I understand they've got the veteran guard play. Overall, they're a decent team. Coming back from last year, they were the number 1 overall team going into last year. They missed the tournament completely. I just think St. Mary's, this could be the year in terms of a good defense to go on a deeper run. St. Mary's advances, and I do think Arizona ends up beating New Mexico and ending their little run. They will advance on to the Elite Eight, so that's a 5v2 matchup. Next, we do have Houston taking on James Madison, and of course, I think Houston will defeat James Madison and advance on to the Elite Eight there. James Madison, they could have a nice Cinderella run, but it's going to be done against a team like Houston. And then you do have Kentucky taking on Florida, and I do think Florida, as a 7 seed, advances to the Elite Eight in this region. They're very bipolar. It was 50-50. They're either going to lose in the first round or go real deep, and I've got them going to the Elite Eight against Houston. So that's 1v3, 1v7. And then down here in the Midwest, the final region predictions here for the Sweet 16, it is Purdue taking on Kansas, and I do think Purdue, the 1 seed, advances there, beating Kansas. Kansas is very similar to Duke. I just can't buy them. Yes, they have the talent. Will they put it together in the tournament? It's unlikely. I guess it's possible, but based off of what we've seen this year, it's not probable. And also, I love kind of the revenge factor, both for Arizona and for Purdue to go deeper into the tournament this year after losing early. They're both due for deeper runs, and they both have a roster that says they're Elite Eight potential teams. That's why I've got both of them into the Elite Eight. And then you do have Oregon taking on Tennessee, and I do think Tennessee does beat Oregon, so that will set up a 1v2 chalk matchup in the Midwest region there. That is the only chalk matchup I think I have, 2v5, 1v2, and then 1v7 and 1v3. So I love the way this bracket is scaled right now, and the seeds are done. Moving on to the Elite Eight games, it is UConn taking on Illinois. If you've got the balls to pick Illinois in this game, listen, UConn, they're just so hard to pick against. They could certainly lose. It's March Madness, but I can't pick against UConn in this game. Illinois, they won the Big Ten, I get it, but they're a little inconsistent, and UConn just is so much deeper than Illinois. I'm sorry. I have to pick them to advance. So UConn advances to the Final Four. They won the entire thing last year. Next, it is St. Mary's taking on Arizona. I will have Arizona beating St. Mary's and advancing to the Final Four. So that will set up a Final Four game of the number 1 seed UConn versus number 2 seed Arizona. Moving on to the South region, it is Houston taking on Florida, and I do think Houston advances to the national title, another one seed advancing, beating Florida, ending their Cinderella Elite Eight run there. And then moving on to the Midwest, it is Purdue and Tennessee, and I do think Tennessee advances and beats Purdue. They will move on to the national title. So 1v2 versus 1v2. You could argue that, oh, one of these teams needs to be a lower seed. I understand. I hear what you're saying, but this is just my predictions. It's 1v2 versus 1v2. It is UConn taking on Arizona. I do think Arizona will beat UConn, believe it or not, and advance to the national title. It is so hard to repeat. Yes, you could argue that if this was the game that was being played, UConn would be the favorites. I get it, but repeating is almost impossible. Even making the national title game again, it's very hard. They will be taking on Houston, so it will be Arizona versus Houston in the national title game. And I will have Houston, the Cougars, winning the national title here. They are my official national champion, even after the loss to Iowa State. That's going to galvanize them. That's actually good for them. I treated that loss as a good thing because I saw right through it and said, no, you don't want to peak right now. Houston wins the national title, and they end up winning this game. How many total points will be scored? It's going to be a defensive battle, and we're going to be looking at 112. You know what? Maybe like 119 total points. I personally don't think the tiebreaker will matter. My bracket, the way this is done, unbelievable. But guys, those are just my predictions on the 2024 March Madness tournament. That's going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on X. Link to that's always in the description.